woman. So this Muslim woman took her Shahada in 1974. You can imagine that was 50 years ago. And so when she took her Shahada, she was in the South, and she decided to put on a hijab, further distancing herself from her family. So fast forward, I am talking to the sister about her retirement. And she's showing me how much money she's getting in Social Security. When I asked her, I said, well, Auntie, where's your 401k? Where's your 403b? Where's your individual retirement account? And she said, I never invested in that because I thought it was haram. So here's this woman, this Muslim woman who's been Muslim and practicing her faith in this country for 5 decades. And she's going into retirement with $1,000 in Social Security. And while I know that Allah is going to take care of his servant, it just pains me that the sister didn't know that there was a way to save and invest for your future, but to do so in a way that's aligned with our faith. And so what a Mana Mutual Fund does is that we make that plausible for our community. So we have an investment fund that's Sharia compliant, and we're going to get to that, but it also allows you to save and invest for your family. So inshallah, my name is Hood Williams. I'm originally from the Washington, D.C. area. I lived in Atlanta for 15 years, and then 2 years ago, I moved to Dallas, Texas. Myself, my wife, and our 6 children, our 6 sons. And so when I start this presentation, we always have to say that investment requires taking on risk, and that risk can include the loss of your capital. Okay, so 5 things I'm going to talk about. So the first one is I just want to talk about what are the habits of successful investors. And I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'm just going to talk about 2. The first one is to save early and often. So the earlier you start saving, the more that your funds are there going to work for you. So the earlier you start, the better. And number 2 is that we're not talking about timing the market. We're talking about time in the market, and we're going to see how that's going to make a big difference for your return. And so when we think about investing, we want to think about what are the reasons that we're going to save and invest. So sometimes we have to save and invest if we want to buy a home for our family. If we're going to Hajj, the price of Hajj is going up. For education for our children, for retirement, and also healthcare savings. And when we think about the number 2 things is I want to talk about saving for college. So when we think about saving for college, we know that the cost of college has increased over the last 20 years. Additionally, the average graduate of college graduates with over $30,000 in debt. Like, just imagine that. Imagine starting your professional career already $30,000 in debt. So we're going to talk about how can you offset that. So if you change in your fancy cup of coffee, the kind of $5 Frappuccino that you get, so that's $5 a day, $25 a week, say $100 a month, and let's just say $1,000 a year. So when your son or daughter is born, if you switch from putting money into a fancy cup of coffee and save that and invest that in your son and your daughter's education, and you do $1,000 a year, by the time they're 3, they'll have $3,200. By the time they're 18, based off of a 7% rate of return in your investment, they'll have over $34,000. So that $34,000 can directly offset that $30,000 of debt that folks have just by replacing your fancy cup of coffee for savings for your son and daughter's college education. The second part is what can you use, or what kind of vehicle can you use to save for your son or daughter's college education? So we have what's called an educational savings account. This account allows you to put away $2,000 per year per child. The money grows tax-free, and then when you use it for anything educational related, you won't have to pay any taxes on it. So not just tuition, but room and board. If you're buying them a computer, if you're paying for them to study abroad, if you're paying for them to have a tutor, all of these will be a way where you can use an educational savings account. So you have up until the age of 18 to put money away for your child. And then they can use it up to the age of 30. At the age of 30, if they still don't have to use it, you can transfer it to another sibling or to another relative. In addition to the ESA, we also have UTMA accounts. So UTMA accounts are accounts that can be used for more than just college education. So it's an account that you can open for your son or daughter, and they can invest, but they can use it on paying for a wedding, paying for a trip to Hajj, a variety of other uses as well. The difference for the UTMA is that actually it's taxable. So for the money, for the growth in this account, it will be taxable, but the first $1,250 per year of taxes will be tax-free. So in addition to paying tax on it, you also have some tax-free. That first $1,250 is going to be tax-free. One of the things that we don't talk about here, but often people ask about, are 529 plans. So 529 plans are state-sponsored educational savings accounts. And so these 529 plans are great because it allows you to put away more money. You can put up to $16,000 a year per child. But the downside of the 529 is that they have very limited investment options. So you might not find a Sharia-compliant investment option. Okay, so that was number two. Number three is I want to talk about retirement. When you think about retirement, there's a couple of sources of income in retirement. Of course, there's personal savings and investment. If you're lucky, you probably qualify for a pension plan. There is Social Security, and then there's employment during retirement. And the idea is to make employment during retirement optional, or that you don't have to be employed during retirement to make ends meet. So who can guess the average Social Security payment in 2023? Per month, yes. $2,000, pretty close. 1844. So what can you get in Fort Worth for 1844? Can you get a 2-bedroom in a nice area? Not even more, right? So actually, the average rent for a 2-bedroom across this whole country is $1,786, right? So this 1844 might pay for your living or might pay for your rent. And so when we think about, so Social Security is not going to be enough, so we need to have personal savings and investments. And so when you think about personal savings and investments, there's a couple of different options. We have mutual funds, we have life insurance, we have real estate, we have stocks, we have IRAs. The ones highlighted in orange are the ones that are not Sharia compliant. They're based on interest, certificate of deposit, annuities, and bonds. And so in this illustration, right, it talks about that power of saving for the long term and starting early. So in this slide, the person on the left started investing $1,000 a year at the age of 25, and they stopped at the age of 35. So for 10 years, $1,000 a year, they invested $10,000. On the right is someone who started a bit later. So they started at 35, and they had saved and invested $1,000 a year from the age of 35 to the age of 65. So the total is they invested $30,000. But at the age of 65, the person on the left is going to have $112,000, while the person on the right only has $101,000, right? So the person who started early, even though they saved less, is going to have more money over the next 30 years than the person who saved 3 times as much as them. And this is all based on the 7% rate of return. This next illustration is the illustration that's my favorite. It talks about someone at the age of 25. You can imagine that this person is starting their first full-time job. They just probably finished graduating, they finished grad school, and they're starting their professional career. And so they're deciding, I'm going to save and invest $250 per paycheck. Right, $250 per paycheck. That's not easy. That's real money, right? So $250 per paycheck, $500 a month, $6,000 a year. So if they start that at the age of 25, when they're age of 65 in retirement, they'll have $1.3 million from that just one investment. Hey, but I've been 25 before, right? I realize that you're 25, probably got that first job. You're like, oh, I've been looking at that teal green Tesla for the last 8 years, right? I'm going to wait. So at age 25, you wait a decade and you start at age 35. So if you start at age 35 and you do $500 a month, $6,000 a year, at the age of 65, you'll only have $606,000. By waiting just 10 years, you're going to lose off on the opportunity cost of over $500,000 of retirement investment assets. Now that's an expensive decade. But the same thing, at 35, you may have a few kids, so you might try to push that to 45. And if you start at 45, you'll have less than half of that amount again. And so just one more point about this. So for those young folks who start at 25, at the age of 65, they would have put in $240,000. That's a lot of money. But they'll have over $1 million worth of profit. So 4 times the amount that they actually took out of their paycheck, they're going to get that in profit. So how this works, how this retirement works for Americans is that over this time from 25 to 65, you're saving so you can build up this wealth. And then at 65, when you have $1.3 million, then you can take 7% a year. That's going to be $90,000 and live off that $90,000 in perpetuity, right? And you still have $1.3 million to pass on to your relatives. So it's really important to start early. It's really important to kind of build up that wealth for your retirement. And so when we're talking about retirement, there's a couple of different options when you're investing for retirement. The first one is going to be a traditional IRA. The traditional IRA lets you put in $7,000 per year. In the traditional one, you get a tax deduction when you put it in. It's going to grow tax-free. And then when you take it out in retirement, that's when you'll start paying taxes on it. And the traditional IRA is very easy to maintain. You have a wider range of investment options, including Sharia-compliant investment options. And it's also self-directed. The second option is called a Roth IRA. The Roth IRA is that you don't get a tax deduction when you put it in. It still grows tax-free, so there's no taxes while it's growing. And then when you're in retirement, you can take those funds out without paying any taxes on it. So that's one of the things about the Roth. Additionally, the Roth has a little bit of built-in flexibility because you put in after-tax money. So if you need to take out your contributions, you can take your contributions out at any time without taxes or penalties. Lastly, after 5 years, you can take out the contribution and the profit if you are paying major medical expenses, if you're in bankruptcy, God forbid, or if you're buying a house for the first time, if it's your first time home buying, or if you're paying for anyone in your immediate family to go to college, and when you're 59 and a half. So for those 5 reasons, you can take out both the contribution and the profit. One of the downsides about the Roth is that if you make more than $240,000 as a couple, then it kind of limits how much money that you could put into a Roth IRA. In addition to those two, the traditional and the Roth, you also have the 401ks and 403bs. These are employer-sponsored plans. So in the employer-sponsored plan, it's great because they allow you to put in much more money. You can put up to $23,000 away in your 401k. The downside of the 401k is that you have very limited investment options. So you might not find a Sharia-compliant investment option. But we have 2 kind of ways around that. The first one is you can ask your company if they have a self-directed brokerage account. A self-directed brokerage account will allow you to invest your 401k however you want. The second option is after you leave that employer, you can roll your 401k over into an individual retirement account, and then you'll have many more kind of investment options. So that was third. Number four is we're going to talk about what it means to be an Islamic investment company. It sounds great, it's an Islamic investment company, and a lot of folks would say it, but what does that really mean in essence? Well, the first thing is that you have to have somebody who's coming in and auditing you and making sure that you're doing what you say you're going to do. And so for Amana Mutual Funds, we use a company called Amani Advisors. It's based out of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And they review our portfolio on a quarterly basis, and they give us a Sharia certificate on an annual basis. Number two is that what we are going to review is that the first thing that we do is we do a business screening. So if the primary business of the company is pornography, alcohol, gambling, if it's a weapons manufacturing, if it's Boeing, or if it's creating weapons of mass destruction, if it's interest, if it's insurance related, we're not going to invest in those companies full stop. Number two is that we have some financial screenings that our scholars have asked us to put in. So we look at how much debt the company has. It has to be less than a third of the value of the company. We look at what type of assets they have on their books. Their accounts receivable has to be less than 45% of their total assets. And because we're looking at U.S. companies, these companies are going to have impermissible income from secondary or tertiary sources. So the impermissible income has to be less than 5% of their total income. In addition to these two screenings, we also have an environmental, a sustainable, and a governance screen. So in addition to being Sharia compliant, we're also ESG certified. Okay, so this is the last part. The five is, I'm just going to talk a bit about the different funds that we manage for Amana Mutual Fund. And so how it works, the first question you have to ask yourself is what kind of account works best for me? Am I looking for a Roth IRA? Am I a business owner and I want to create a 401k for myself and my employees? Do I want to open an educational savings account for my children? You can open any of those accounts with us. Most of those accounts can be opened online in about 20 minutes. The minimum to get started investing is just $100. So it's easy to open any of those accounts, whether it's retirement, whether it's educational, or whether it's just investing for the future. But after you open the account, you have to pick, how do I want that money to be invested? And so we have 4 Sharia compliant mutual funds. All 4 of those funds pass the same stringent criteria, but we have different type of investors. And so the one on the bottom, the amount of participation fund, the focus or the objective is capital preservation and current income. So you're not going to get a lot of growth. It's not very aggressive, but you're going to make sure that your money is preserved. If we go up a level of risk, we have the amount of income fund. This is our oldest fund. This fund was started in 1986. And it looks at large U.S. companies who are paying a dividend. If we go up another level of risk, we have the Amana Growth Fund. The Amana Growth Fund is our best performing fund. It looks at companies who are primed for growth. So it's based on large U.S. companies who are primed for growth. And then our last fund is called the Amana Developing World Fund. So we have 2 domestic equity funds. And we also want to give our shareholders exposure to the international market. So now we have a Developing World Fund. This is our fund that has the highest level of risk. And so when you think about returns, when I tell you about the returns for these funds, you always have to have a benchmark. Because if I tell you, hey, I'm giving you a 10% return, you might think that's great until you go outside and find out that the market is giving a 20% return, right? So we always have to have a benchmark. So the benchmark for our growth and our income fund is the S&P 500. The S&P 500 is basically an index of the largest 500 companies in the U.S. So if we're looking at real numbers, right? If you invested $10,000 in the amount of income fund in 2014, right? In 2024, it would be worth $26,000. Right, not bad. That's 2.6 times what you put in. Compare that to the S&P 500. So if you invested at $10,000 in the S&P 500, it would be worth $33,000, right? So the income fund performance was a little less than the S&P 500. If you invested at $10,000 in the amount of growth fund in 2014, this year it will be worth $41,000. That's over 4 times the amount that you put in. And when we look at those numbers, when we look at those figures, the amount of income fund, the average return over the last decade was 10.2%, which was less than the 12.9% for the S&P 500. But the amount of growth fund's return was 15.6%. So that outperformed the S&P by over 2 percentage points over the last decade. When we look at our other funds, the amount of developing world fund, the average return over the last decade is right around 3%, which is in line with its benchmark. And the amount of participation, which again is the very conservative fund, the average return over the last 10 years, over the last 5 years is 1.5. So a little less than the benchmark of 2.1. In addition to the last thing, this is a bonus. In addition to investing, we also help our shareholders with financial planning. So if you want to understand, hey, Hood, I'm 38 years old, I have X amount in my 401k. Hey, how am I doing in terms of being ready for retirement? We can help customers with that. We also help customers creating a custom portfolio as well. You know, I think we might have a little bit of time for question and answer, but this is a QR code. It's my contact information. We also have a few brochures over here. If someone wants more information as well. There's also a clipboard if you want to leave your name and contact information. I'll send you an email. Maybe we can schedule a time to talk one-on-one. And so I wanted to give you all a quick understanding of what it means to be Islamic investing. You know, one of the things that we're looking forward to is that October this year is going to be Islamic Financial Literacy Month. So it's going to be a time where we want to make sure that our Muslim community is understanding the best of financial literacy and the best of Islamic finance together. So we're going to be hitting masjids, hitting Islamic schools, wherever we're invited to make sure that we're presenting information about what it means to invest Islamically. And other companies as well are going to be doing work on Islamic finance as well. So we got time for a few questions.
You mentioned risk, but you didn't talk about like potential downsides. Could you invest your money and what would be the worst case scenario?
That's a very good question. He said, what could be the worst case scenario if you're investing? And so investing requires risk. And so when we look at this slide, you can see that it's not going to go up linearly, right? You're going to have rise and fall. So actually the US stock market, 27% of the time, it finishes negative. So once every 4 years, it's going to finish in a negative, right? So you can lose money, but over time, right? We're talking about investing for the long term, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years, that you're going to do better. So the US stock market, since 1928, the average return over the last almost 100 years has been 9%, right? So there are going to be years where it's going to be down, but over the long term, it usually does pretty well.
That's like, you know, like, what's your mission statement?
That's very good. He said, what's our mission statement? So who started the company? What is pretty unique about us is that we were started by a group of Muslim families. A group of Muslim families got together and they wanted an alternative to an interest-bearing checking account. And for us now, it's like, why would you want an alternative to an interest-bearing checking account? But in 1986, the interest on a checking account was 13%. And so, not doing that, they wanted an alternative, so they got together to start this investment fund, and they hired a guy named Nicholas Kaiser to run the fund. And so Turner Capital runs the Amana Mutual Fund. So Amana Mutual Fund was started by a group of Muslim families. And the other thing you asked about the mission statement, I was thinking about this is the question. And I was thinking about, why do I do this work? And, part of it is creating wealth for our community. But my hope is not really creating wealth for the community. My hope is really creating philanthropy. I don't want our community to be rich. I want our community to be giving. And in order to be giving, you have to have something. And so really trying to drive that within our company. One of the things that we also do, we help match kids, we help Islamic schools, we help them to boost their fundraising, we help them to save and invest, to kind of start an endowment as well. You have any questions from the sisters too?
Another question. So if you have 401k at work, and they match, let's say, investors grant, they match one from it's sitting there because the funds that they're all interest bearing or not Sharia compliant. Instead, there are two options. One is that you can ask them to be self-directed and use that to invest in a lot of money. Second is that when I retire from I leave the job, then I just have one option, is have that and you don't invest. Just
Exactly.
make sure that get that money and leave that on the table. Right? Is there
Exactly.
other options?
So the question was, what are the options if you have a 401k and they're matching, but they don't have Sharia compliant investment options? And so one of the things that we have to understand living here is that we have to do the best we can until we can do better. And so when you're thinking about this matching, getting the matching, putting it into something that is the kind of best possible available fund, right? So for example, if you put it in a bond fund, it's just interest. But if you put it in an S&P 500 fund, at least you're moving away from interest and you're moving towards investment. And in the S&P 500, you're going to have a little bit of everything. But when you can start moving it over to Sharia compliant funds, so on and so forth.
So they have list of ones that you can, like for example, ability is so they give you here's the funds, you can just pick one. And every fund I check, there's some finance companies in there, banks are
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know what percentage,
Yeah.
but again,
And if you can keep it as cash, then you'll just be able to get your match and keep it as a cash. But, usually you're kind of caught, for that time with not a lot of good options. Right.
I mean, the other option you say is just get the money, invest in Roth IRA, and after tax, you can do that.
Yeah, you can do that, but then you're leaving,
that money
yeah,
on the table.
yeah, and, and that's, and for most people, that's not sustainable, right? So,
And for the income fund that you guys have, so let's say somebody has $100,000, they invest in income. Will it generate, if you invest those into a dividend company, right? They give you money monthly or quarterly or whatever, right? So is the money that's coming in to that person in a dividend, that person can choose to reinvest or use that for other things.
So
Is that going up and down as well?
So the income fund, he asked, is it paying a dividend? So in our income fund, every company that we invest in has to be paying a dividend. So those companies are paying a dividend to the fund. Then the fund will pay you a dividend twice a year. So you'll get a dividend from the fund twice a year. Most people have those dividends reinvested in the fund, so they're not getting the money themselves. It's going to be reinvested in funds, and you're going to get more shares of those funds. So that's how that compounding works. So usually, but for example, say you're older and you can say, hey, don't reinvest the dividend, send me a check. And so you will get a check for those dividends twice a year.
And that's a check, or that dividend is also.
Yeah. And so in addition to the dividend distribution, your account will also go up and down, right? You know, you hope it'll go up, but your account value also goes up and you will also get dividend distribution. Alhamdulillah, I won't kick you. Thank you.
I want to say Jazakallah khairan to Brother Hood Williams, investment specialist. As we are looking to purchase our land here, we're definitely going to be interested in seeing how he can help us. He said we can even take some of our stocks that we have and donate it to the community to help purchase land and build schools and stuff like that. So we definitely need to look outside of the box so that we can sustain our community for future generations and not just have to ask for money, but endowments and things like that. So Jazakallah khairan, may Allah reward you, Brother Hood Williams. So we look forward to seeing you again. If anybody wants to sign up, you can get a paper or just take his name and brochure that we have.
Alhamdulillah, I'm gonna keep going. Okay, that's all right, so,
You gotta get in there. Starting with 25. You can put the 8 houses. You can put the 18 houses.
oh yeah. Yeah, so one of the rules of the